I'm Kimberly, and this is the story of how my family fell apart. It all started when I was 7 years old, and my little brother Tommy turned 5. I remember the day clearly. Mom had taken Tommy to his first real music lesson. When they came back, she was practically floating on air. "Kim, come here," she called out, her voice high with excitement. I came running down the stairs, wondering what all the fuss was about. "Your brother is a musical genius." I didn't really know what that meant, but I could tell it was important. "That's great," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "The teacher says he has perfect pitch," Mom continued, her eyes shining. "Do you know how rare that is? He's going to be a star, I just know it." From that day on, it was all about Tommy. Mom quit her part-time job to focus on his career. She'd spend hours researching music competitions and TV shows for kids. Our living room turned into a mini recording studio, with a keyboard, microphone, and even a small karaoke machine. Don't get me wrong, Tommy was good. When he sang, his voice was clear and pure, like a little angel. But I couldn't help feeling left out. Mom was too wrapped up in Tommy's potential stardom, and Dad was barely around. He'd leave for work before I woke up and come home after I was in bed. On weekends, he'd tinker in the garage or watch TV, too exhausted to do much else. So, I learned to take care of myself. I'd make my own lunches, do my homework without being asked, and try not to bother anyone with my problems. It wasn't all bad, though. I had my books, my few close friends, and my grandma. Grandma was Mom's mother, but they couldn't have been more different. While Mom was all about the spotlight and fame, Grandma was down-to-earth and practical. She owned a small convenience store in town, and I started helping out there after school when I was 12. "You're a good worker, Kimberly," she'd say, smiling at me over her glasses. "Smart with money, too. That'll serve you well in life." Those words meant more to me than all the vague praise I got at home. At least someone saw me for who I was, not just as Tommy's sister. Speaking of Tommy, he was thriving under Mom's attention. By the time he was 7, he'd already won a few local singing competitions. Mom would come home, waving his trophies and certificates, her face glowing with pride. "Did you see Tommy on TV last night?" she'd ask me, not waiting for an answer. The judges said he was the most talented child they'd seen in years. I'd nod and smile, trying to be happy for my brother. But I couldn't help the twinge of jealousy when I saw how differently we were treated. Tommy had the latest toys and gadgets, while I had to save up my allowance for months to buy anything I wanted. As I entered high school, the divide between Tommy and me grew even wider. While I attended the local public school, Mom enrolled Tommy in an expensive private academy known for its music program. Every morning, she'd drop him off in our beat-up minivan, fussing over his uniform and reminding him about his after-school voice lessons. Meanwhile, I'd be halfway to school already, having caught the early bus. One day, after a particularly grueling day of classes and a shift at Grandma's store, I came home to find Mom and Tommy sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by brochures and flyers. "What's all this?" I asked, dropping my backpack by the door. Mom looked up, her eyes shining with excitement. "Oh, Kim, you won't believe it. Tommy's been invited to audition for the National Youth Choir. The audition's in New York. We'll need to buy new clothes, book flights, a hotel." I couldn't help but ask, "Can we afford all that?" Mom's smile faltered for a moment. "We'll manage. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Tommy. We can't let it pass by." I nodded, knowing better than to argue. But as I headed up to my room, I couldn't help but wonder, what about my opportunities? It wasn't that I was jealous of Tommy's talent. I was proud of him, in a way. But I was tired of being an afterthought in my own family. That night, I heard Mom and Dad arguing in their bedroom. Their voices were muffled, but I could make out enough to know it was about money. "We're already in debt, Linda," Dad was saying. "We can't keep spending like this." "But this could be Tommy's big break," Mom insisted. "Don't you want him to succeed?" "Of course I do," Dad sighed. But what about Kim? We haven't put aside anything for her college fund. There was a pause, and then Mom's voice, softer now, Kim's smart. She'll get scholarships. Besides, she's always been independent. She'll figure something out. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, their words echoing in my head. She'll figure something out. That's what it always came down to, didn't it? I was expected to fend for myself while they poured everything into Tommy's future. The next day, I went to work at Grandma's store. As I was restocking shelves, Grandma called me over to the counter. "Kimberly," she said, her voice gentle. "Is everything all right? You seem distracted today." I hesitated for a moment, then the whole story came spilling out, Tommy's audition, the money problems, my fears about college. Grandma listened patiently, her face growing more concerned with each word. When I finished, she shook her head. "Listen, I've been thinking. You're a hard worker, Kimberly. How would you like to start earning a real wage here at the store? Not just pocket money, but something you could save for your future." For the first time in a long while, I felt seen and appreciated. As I hugged my grandmother, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could create my own opportunities. I didn't need to wait for someone else to invest in my future. With Grandma's help, I could start investing in myself. As the years went by, I threw myself into my studies and my work at Grandma's store. By the time I was 15, I'd managed to save up a decent amount. My goal? A laptop for school. One Friday afternoon, I decided to count my savings. I went to my closet and pulled out the pink ceramic piggy bank Grandma had given me years ago. But when I shook it, something felt off. The familiar jingle of coins was missing. My heart racing, I opened the bottom and turned it over. Nothing, not a single coin fell out. With shaking hands, I made my way downstairs. Tommy was sprawled on the couch, playing video games on a shiny new console. "Hey, Tommy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You haven't seen my piggy bank, have you? Or the money inside it?" He barely glanced up from his game. "Nope, sorry." I took a deep breath and headed to the kitchen, where Mom was preparing dinner. "Mom," I began, did you take the money from my piggy bank?" She turned to me, her face calm. "Oh, that. Yes, I did. Tommy needed a new game console. His old one broke, and he was so upset. I knew you had some savings, so I took it." I stood there, speechless. Tears were threatening to spill, but I refused to let them fall. When will you pay me back?" I managed to ask. Mom sighed, as if I was being unreasonable. "We'll see. Times are tight right now, with all of Tommy's expenses. You understand, don't you? This is an investment in his future." I didn't understand. I couldn't understand how she could do this to me. Without another word, I turned and ran out of the house. I kept running until I reached Grandma's store, tears blurring my vision. Grandma took one look at me and flipped the open sign to closed. She led me to the back room and sat me down. "What happened, Kimberly?" she asked gently. Between sobs, I told her everything. As I spoke, I watched Grandma's face change from concern to disbelief to anger. "What am I going to do, Grandma?" I asked, feeling more lost than ever. "I can't trust them." Grandma was quiet for a moment, then she stood up. "Wait here," she said. She disappeared into the front of the store. When she came back, she was carrying a laptop box. "I was saving this for your birthday," she said, placing the box in my lap. "But I think you need it now. Just don't take this home. Keep it here at the store. Use it after your shifts or on weekends. I don't want your mother getting her hands on this too." That night, as I lay in bed, I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone take advantage of me like that again. I would work harder, save more, and find a way out of this house where I felt like a stranger. My 16th birthday rolled around with little fanfare. Mom remembered the date this time, at least. She and Dad wished me a happy birthday over breakfast, Dad sliding a card across the table before rushing off to work. I invited a few close friends. We set up some folding tables in the backyard, strung up some lights, and had a pretty good time. I'd saved up from my job at Grandma's store to buy snacks and drinks. My best friend Rachel helped me decorate with some balloons and streamers we got from the dollar store. As we sat around, eating chips and laughing about school drama, I caught myself feeling genuinely happy. For a moment, I could forget about the family dynamics and just be a normal teenager celebrating her birthday. But reality has a way of creeping back in. When Tommy's 16th birthday came around 2 years later, it was an extravaganza. They rented out the fanciest restaurant in town, invited what seemed like half the city, and even hired a professional photographer. The cherry on top? A shiny new car parked outside with a big red bow. I stood off to the side during the party, watching Tommy beam as he accepted congratulations and gifts. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to resent him. This wasn't his fault. He was just living the life our parents, especially Mom, had orchestrated for him. A few months later, I was thrilled to learn I'd been accepted to study economics at a college in the next state. Even better, I'd earned a partial scholarship. But as I soon discovered, partial was the operative word. The scholarship wouldn't cover all my expenses. With trepidation, I approached my parents one evening. "Mom, Dad," I began. "I got into State University for economics. I have a scholarship, but I'll need some help with the rest of the tuition and living expenses." Dad looked up from his newspaper, a crease between his brows. "That's great news about the scholarship, Kim. But you know money's tight right now. With Tommy's music school fees." Mom jumped in. "Kimberly, you're a smart girl. I'm sure you can figure something out. Maybe get a job? You've always been so independent." Defeated, I retreated to my room. As I sat on my bed, staring at the acceptance letter, my phone buzzed with a text. It was Grandma, asking how the conversation with my parents went. I called her back, my voice shaking as I recounted what had happened. Grandma listened quietly, then said, "Kimberly, don't you worry. We'll figure this out together." True to her word, Grandma set up a college fund for me. Between that, my scholarship, and a part-time job I picked up at a cafe near campus, I managed to make it work. "You're going to do great things, Kimberly," Grandma said. "I'm so proud of you." Those words carried me through the tough times in college. When I was up late studying, or pulling double shifts at the cafe, I'd remember Grandma's faith in me and push through. I called Tommy occasionally, trying to keep our connection alive. He was at a prestigious music college, all expenses paid by our parents, of course. Despite the differences in our situations, it was nice to hear his voice, to know that at least one person in that house might be missing me. After 4 grueling years of balancing studies, work, and tight budgets, I finally graduated with my degree in economics. Armed with my hard-earned qualifications and a determination to succeed, I returned to my hometown. It wasn't long before I landed a job at a prestigious financial firm and found a small but comfortable apartment to rent. Life settled into a pleasant routine. Work was challenging but rewarding, and in my free time I started to build a life for myself outside of my family's shadow. I made new friends, took up hiking on weekends, and even started dating a bit. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my mother standing there, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. She stepped inside, wringing her hands. "Kimberly, I need your help." Those words sent a chill down my spine. In all my years, I couldn't remember my mother ever asking for my help. "What's wrong?" I asked, leading her to the couch. She sat down heavily, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sick, Kim, really sick. The doctors, they say I need treatment, but our insurance won't cover it all." My heart dropped. Despite everything, she was still my mother. "How much do you need?" $15,000, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's a lot, but I didn't know where else to turn. Your father and we've spent everything on Tommy's education. We thought it would pay off by now, but..." The next morning, we drove to the bank in silence. As we waited in line, Mom started talking, her voice low. "You know, Tommy's doing so well," she said. "He's got offers from several big music groups. Once he signs, we'll be able to pay you back in no time." I nodded, only half listening. My mind was racing, thinking about how I'd manage the loan repayments on top of my rent and other expenses. After signing what felt like a mountain of paperwork, I transferred the $15,000 to my mother's account. As we left the bank, she hugged me tightly. A few days later, I was scrolling through my social media feed during my lunch break when I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was Tommy, my brother, posting selfies from the Swiss Alps. Confused, I quickly sent him a message. "Hey Tommy, aren't you supposed to be in school? What are you doing in Switzerland?" His reply came quickly, "Oh, hey Kim. Yeah, Mom surprised me with this trip. Said I was having a creative block and needed to recharge. It's amazing here. I'm staying for 2 months." I stared at my phone, my mind refusing to process what I was reading. 2 months in Switzerland? Creative block? Then it hit me. The $15,000 loan. It wasn't for medical treatment, it was for Tommy's vacation. With shaking hands, I called my mother. "Kimberly, what is it now?" Her voice was irritated, as if I was interrupting something important. I took a deep breath. "Mom, we need to talk about the loan. About Tommy's trip. How could you lie to me like that?" There was a pause, then she sighed. "Now, listen here. Your brother is a creative person. He needs constant inspiration and pampering to open up creatively. This trip was essential for his career. He's going to be famous, and we all need to support him." "Support him?" I echoed, my voice rising. "By taking out loans we can't afford? By lying to your other child?" "Oh, don't be such a miser," she scoffed. "You should be happy to support your brother." That was the last straw. "Mom, I want the money back. All of it. Now." Her laugh was cold. "Don't be ridiculous, Kimberly. The money's spent. Besides, you're doing well enough. You don't need it." "If you don't pay me back," I said, my voice shaking with anger, "I'll sue you." There was a moment of stunned silence, then she exploded. "Sue me? Your own mother? You're a terrible daughter. I can't believe I raised such a selfish, heartless child." "This is your last chance, Mom," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Pay me back, or I'm going to court." "Go ahead," she spat. "See if I care. You're dead to me, Kimberly. Dead." The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, shaking with a mix of anger and shock. I'd known this conversation wouldn't go well, but I never imagined it would end like this. In a daze, I called the one person I knew I could always count on, Grandma. I broke down, sobbing as I recounted everything that had happened. Grandma listened patiently, making soothing noises as I poured out my heart. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Grandma spoke, her voice firm. "Kimberly, listen to me. What your mother did was wrong. If you decide to go through with this, I'll support you. I know a good lawyer, my friend's son. He might be willing to take on your case for a reduced fee." The next few months were a whirlwind of legal consultations, paperwork, and sleepless nights. True to her word, Grandma covered the legal fees and introduced me to her friend's son, a sharp young lawyer named Michael. "It's an open and shut case," Michael assured me after our first meeting. "We have the bank records, the text messages. Your mother doesn't have a leg to stand on." The day of the trial arrived. As I walked into the courtroom, I saw my mother for the first time in months. She sat on the other side, her face a mask of cold fury. She didn't even look at me. The proceedings seemed to pass in a blur. Michael presented our case clearly and concisely, showing the judge the evidence of my mother's deception. When it was her turn to speak, my mother spun a tale of a desperate need for a family medical emergency, but her story quickly fell apart under questioning. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge made his ruling. In the matter of Kimberly Johnson versus Linda Johnson, he began, "I find in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant is ordered to repay the full amount of $15,000, plus interest and court costs." A few days later, I received notice that my mother had taken out a loan to repay me. The money was back in my account, but it felt hollow somehow. I'd won the case, but I'd lost my family in the process. The dust had barely settled from the court case when the real storm hit. It started with a notification on my phone. A friend had tagged me in a post. Curious, I opened it, only to feel my stomach drop. There, on my mother's social media page, was a long, heart-wrenching post about how her own daughter had cruelly taken her to court. She painted herself as a loving, sacrificial mother who had given everything for her children, only to be betrayed in her time of need. My phone buzzed constantly over the next few days as more relatives reached out, not to hear my side, but to berate me for my actions. "I raised you better than this," my aunt scolded. "You brought shame to this entire family," a cousin messaged. "Don't bother coming to the next family reunion," an uncle warned. In the midst of this storm, there was one unwavering source of support, Grandma. She called me every day, her voice a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. "Don't you pay any mind to those fools," she'd say firmly. "They don't know the half of what's been going on in that house all these years." A week after my mother's posts went viral, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in years, my father's. "I'd been seeing your mother's posts," he began, and I braced myself for the criticism. But then he surprised me. "I want to hear your side of the story. The full story." So I told him everything. The years of feeling overlooked, the incident with my piggy bank, the struggles through college, and finally, the loan and the betrayal that led to the lawsuit. There was a long silence when I finished. Then, to my shock, my father's voice came back thick with emotion. "I had no idea," he said quietly. "Kimberly, I'm so sorry. I failed you as a father. I followed your mother's lead for too long. I told myself I was providing for the family by working long hours, but the truth is, I was running away from the problems at home. I should have been there for you." Tears were streaming down my face now. This was the most open, honest conversation I'd had with my father in, well, ever. "I've got a lot to make up for," he said. "I know that. But if you're willing, I'd like to try. To be the father I should have been all along." As we continued to talk, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a parent in my corner. It wasn't going to fix everything overnight, but it was a start. After our heart-to-heart, Dad decided to take a closer look at the family finances, something he admitted he should have done years ago. He had found that Mom had been secretly withdrawing money from their joint account for years, funneling it all into Tommy's career. But that wasn't the worst of it. She'd taken out multiple loans in both their names, all to fund Tommy's pursuits. They were drowning in debt, and Dad had been completely in the dark. The confrontation that followed was explosive. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from the neighbors. There was shouting, the sound of dishes shattering, and finally, the arrival of police cars. In the aftermath, Dad filed for divorce. The proceedings were messy, but in the end, Mom got half of everything, which went straight to paying off her mountain of debt. I maintained my distance from Mom, focusing on rebuilding my relationship with Dad and cherishing the unwavering support of Grandma. Life started to feel normal. Then, about a year after the divorce, Mom's triumphant posts started appearing on social media again. Tommy had graduated from his music college and landed a spot in a famous band. Her captions were full of "I told you so's" and thinly veiled jabs at Dad and me. "Some people couldn't see the potential," she wrote. "But a mother always knows." Who's laughing now? I tried not to let it get to me. I was doing well at work, had just made a down payment on my own apartment, and was finally feeling like I was on solid ground. Dad was doing better too, seeming happier and more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. 2 years after Tommy's big break, he took another trip to Switzerland. His social media was full of glamorous shots of the Alps, videos of him partying with his bandmates. Then, one chilly morning, he decided to film himself singing at the top of a mountain, wanting to impress his fans with his vocal range in the thin, cold air. It was a disaster. He caught a severe cold that developed into a serious throat infection. Despite the best medical care, the damage was done. Tommy lost his singing voice. The news hit Mom hard. Her neighbors later told me that they heard screaming coming from her house, sounds of things being thrown and broken. When they went to check on her, they found her in a state of total hysteria. She didn't recognize anyone, kept babbling about lost fortunes and ruined dreams. They had no choice but to call for help. Mom was admitted to a mental health facility. The doctors diagnosed her with a severe nervous breakdown, exacerbated by years of stress. As for Tommy, he spiraled into depression and turned to alcohol. For months, we weren't sure if he'd pull through. But slowly, with support from Dad and me, he started to turn things around. He got sober and, in a twist that surprised us all, applied to college to become a music teacher. "I can't sing anymore," he told me over coffee one day. "But maybe I can help other kids who love music. Do it right, you know? Without all the pressure and crazy expectations." I felt a surge of pride for my little brother. "I think that's a great idea, Tommy." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the tumultuous journey of the past few years. I thought about Mom, still in the facility, trapped in a world of her own making. About Dad, finally free to live his own life. About Tommy, finding a new path. And about myself. I'd stood my ground, fought for what was right, and come out stronger on the other side.